What's up guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we are working on the Z as usual because we're getting it ready for a road trip. If you remember in the last video I mentioned this thing is going to be going on a road trip pretty soon. It's actually in less than 3 weeks, about 2.5. So I definitely have some work to do to get this thing ready for its big trip. So we're going to jump straight into it. You can see I've already removed the front bumper. I have a pretty cool project with that I'm going to throw in a totally different video. Otherwise, I'm gonna get this thing on jack stands so we can get under it because I have some work to do under the front of this thing. So this dent in the fender is definitely not high on the priority list of things I need to fix, but it really bothers me coming out here and seeing this thing all the time, and I know I can fix it pretty quick. So I'm just gonna knock it out using the fender roller to pull this part of the fender out. Not perfect, but much better than it was. At least it doesn't look caved in now. This dent down here was always there, and now I just have a little bit of waviness up here, so looks better than it did. With the dented fender fixed, we can move on to things that actually matter, like getting the oil changed on this thing because I have been neglecting that. It's now seen 2 events on the same oil, which typically you'd like to avoid, but I mean, one was only like 2 hours long, so does that even count? Either way, let's get it done. If you've been a subscriber for a while, you may remember when we did the first oil change on this thing and the oil looked very suspicious. It had a lot of metallics in it. I do believe I figured out what that was, and I don't think it was like rod bearing material or anything catastrophic, but I'm curious to see if this oil change is going to be any clearer or if it will still be full of sketchy looking metallics. Just based off what I'm seeing here with the light kind of shining on the oil, it does look pretty normal. Just looks like regular used oil. I don't see a bunch of shimmery bits in it, so that's really good. I'm hoping the tail end of it here stays that way. All right, so taking a closer look here, you can see there is still some shimmery bits. If I kind of dip my finger in here, you can tell there's some metallics on there. So it is significantly less than the first oil change I did a while back. There was like a ton of metallics in the oil and it really scared me. But I have a theory that I believe the previous owner of this car put some of that like copper stop leak in it, because there was actually way more copper looking metallics in the coolant overflow than there was the oil. So I was like, well, maybe if somebody put something like that in the engine at some point to stop a leak or who knows what, it could have just kind of worked its way through the entire motor and been in the oil. That would explain why I saw it really heavy on the first oil change and now I'm seeing it super, super light. It also looks way more like copper and a lot less like metal, even though bearing material can look like copper. It's typically not such a vibrant color of copper, at least in my experience. I've blown a few motors in the past. But just like last time, the thing still runs great, so I'm just gonna throw some fresh oil in it and hope that it's fine. Hasn't given me any issues yet. Worst case, it shoots a rod out of the block and we'll cross that bridge if we get there. Hopefully we don't. A part honestly too good for the raggedy old Z, but it is this cool Nismo magnetic drain bolt. It even has the Nismo logo on the bottom there. Gonna be tossing this on the oil pan just so the next time I do the oil change, I can actually see if there's some metal in there. Plus, how cool is this? And next thing we're gonna tackle on the list is the front suspension. If you remember in the last video, I kind of did a ghetto fix on this front lower control arm because the bushing had pushed itself out. I'm actually looking at it now for the first time since then, and it has moved right back to where it was. So that ghetto fix was definitely not a permanent fix, but the new control arms are. So I'm gonna get the old ones taken off and get these new ones put in. How nice, this Amazon company sent me some little white gloves to change my car parts with. Here you can get a good look of what that bushing has done. Like I said, you could see it's pushed all the way up against the front side of the subframe there. So little comparison here. You can see just how messed up this bushing really is, especially if we look at it from the side. You can see it is totally blown out. I could probably just tap this whole thing out with a hammer. I honestly can't believe the car drove as good as it did with that as worn out as it was. Still have to throw this cotter pin in here, but other than that, we're good to go. On to the other side. Just tying up some loose odds and ends here, like this coolant line. This guy runs from the upper coolant hose over, down, around to the back of the thermostat housing, I think. But it was always just kind of flopping around. I just had this little like random piece of metal I just used as a little strap, so now it's held in there nice and tight. Another thing I was looking into is the Underglow Lights that I did. They stopped working after I went flying off track at Apple Valley. Well, half of them stopped working. So I went to investigate as to why that could be, and I found some frayed wires on the back here, and I tried to fix it. Let me show you what happened. You can kind of see what's going on here. So these two red bits, this is heat shrink. I tried to connect these because these two wires had come disconnected. Accidentally burnt these ones while doing the heat shrink, but didn't fix the problem, which doesn't surprise me. These are tiny, tiny little wires. Really hard for me to kind of get them back connected together. I basically just like twisted them together and hoped the heat shrink would hold it together because I couldn't do much else, but it didn't work. So the back half does not work. This strip does, this one that runs across the passenger side. And the interesting bit was only half of the front one worked, which I thought was weird. But I found out why that one doesn't work either. So if we look under here, where'd it go? Okay, I've got them turned on now, so you can see they stopped working right there. Now, I was kind of fishing around trying to figure out why, and it's hard to tell, but there you can see it. There is a break. You can see how that little gap's moving. So the actual like board that all the lights are on broke right there, right where my fingernail's at. You can kind of see how they're separated there, so no fixing that. I don't put any fault of that onto the kit itself. I still think it's a great underglow kit, especially for 22 bucks. It looks great, it's pretty bright, the install was really easy, and I think it would be durable on a street car or even a drift car if you were just a better driver than I was. It makes sense that it wouldn't hold up to flying off track the way I did, because it definitely wasn't a graceful like dirt drop or anything. I mean, I actually went flying off like a 4-foot drop and did a pretty significant slide across the frame rails, and you know, I mean, if it ripped the front bumper off, it makes sense that it got into contact with that front part where the lights were. So no fault to the kit. I still think they're cool. I'm gonna pull these off. I'll probably get a new one down the road. It's definitely not a priority, but at least I know it's a real simple fix when I do want some cool lights. A moment of silence for the Underglow kit that stood no chance against my terrible driving. So something else on the to-do list involves our e-brake here. If you have been subscribed for a long time, you'll know at one point I had a Yashiao factory drift button. It's for an S15, and I just kind of made it work on the Z, but the problem with it, while it worked as a drift button, meaning I could yank the parking brake up and down, it would never work as a parking brake. So this mechanism would never lock it into place, which meant I could never park with the car running. Really, I just never had a parking brake. Super inconvenient, kind of annoying. I got over it pretty quick and ended up just removing the Yashiao factory button, which left me with nothing. I just have this little black thing, and it looks ugly and it doesn't really work. And while I don't use the e-brake much for actual drifting because it really doesn't work well, I still want to have the option too. So thankfully GK Tech makes drift buttons specifically for the Z, and they did have a cool pink one. So we're gonna get this guy installed. It's a bit more in-depth of a process compared to like an S chassis where you could just tap this thing in and call it a day. So I'm gonna get this boot removed, and then I will kind of show you guys how you have to like jerry rig the springs in here to make it work. So let's get that off and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So with the parking brake boot removed, we can kind of see how this thing works on the inside here. And we need to remove this coil spring here because this is what engages. Whoop, that came off a little easier than I thought. But that's what keeps tension on this black part here, which is what the button's connected to. You can see how that works. And the button, or the black lever here, is what moves this guy, which is what engages on the locking teeth there. You can kind of see how that works. But the problem is there's nothing to connect these now that the spring's gone. So we need a little piece of wire that will hold this guy up against this guy. And that way it will work with this, but with no spring tension on it. If I press it down, it will stay down. So I can use the parking brake as a drift e-brake. And if I want to pull it out, I can pull it out once these are connected, and it'll function as a parking brake. All right, you can see the little bit of wire I've gotten there that connects the little mechanism there to the black rod. So now if I use this as in drift mode, we'll call it. So with this button on here and it's held down now, it doesn't catch. If I pull the button out, functions as a parking brake. Success. Okay, talk about getting sidetracked. But since I had the center console out, I thought, why not replace these heated seat buttons with these blanks. I bought these a while ago because I knew the seat heaters weren't going to be working, especially with a bucket seat. Obviously I wasn't going to make it work. And I am just a sucker for like cool OEM option parts like this. So now we have 3 blanks instead of 2 buttons and 1 blank. Maybe I'll use one of these for a switch for something, or maybe not. Either way, it looks pretty cool. Better than just having useless switches in my opinion. So I'm going to toss this in, get the center console back in the car, and get this thing buttoned up. All right, check that out. Button is in and it works. We've got our cool little blanks there. So if we press this guy here, perfect. Well, I think the Z is pretty much good. The suspension is fixed up front, oil's changed, and a few other little odds and ends are taken care of. I will still end up doing a full bolt check on the car just to be on the safe side, and I will be double checking the front end alignment since I kind of messed with some of the suspension and stuff. I'd rather be safe than sorry with the amount of miles that I plan on driving this thing. So I think we're good. I do still have some planning and figuring out to do, mostly with how I'm gonna fit everything in the actual car. If you've ever been in a 350Z, you know there's not a lot of cargo space. So I'm probably gonna end up taking the trunk apart, like gutting it basically. Because when Damien was down here, he left 2 wheels and his jack. So I've got to fit those to bring them back up. I've got to fit all my own tools. I won't be bringing my own spare wheels because the friends that I'm meeting up there will have plenty of spares, so I'll be taken care of there. But I'm still gonna have to have my luggage for clothes and, you know, normal stuff when you go on a trip for a couple days. So that part will be interesting. It'll really just take some figuring out, which I'll kind of do when we get closer to actually leaving. But other than figuring that little bit out, I think the Z is ready to go. And that is gonna wrap up today's video. I know it wasn't anything too exciting. It was just me kind of going around and doing some general maintenance and stuff that needed to be done. But like I said, there's always a list of things that have to be done, especially when prepping for a road trip. I'm super excited for that. I know I've talked about it a million times. Hopefully you guys are stoked because it's going to be really cool. But the next thing I'm going to tackle is the bumper, and that will be in the next video. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys for watching. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one.